It's past 12. Oh, hello everyone. 2 minutes past 12, so I'll make a start. Hello everyone on a bright sunny day, certainly here in London. I hope it is wherever you are in the UK. My name is Kevin Bonavere. I'm a councillor in the London Borough of Lewisham, where I'm the cabinet member for refugees. I'm currently also the chair of the City of Sanctuary Local Authority Network Steering Group. And so I'll be hosting today's event. I hope everyone's got access to the very simple agenda. So our topic today is no recourse to public funds. Firstly, can I say, for those of you who have come to your first City of Sanctuary event or your first local authority network event, welcome, and particularly welcome to all my councillor colleagues here today, as well as officers from the respective local authorities and representatives from NGOs and other organisations that are working with migrants, refugees and asylum seekers. And of course, some of you on this call today will have lived experience yourself, so definitely welcome that, because we can only work together by understanding people who've had to go through the system. The City Sanctuary movement is something I hope everybody on this call is very well aware of, and the principles of sanctuary that we stand for. And in the UK, of course, the movement has been working with groups around the country and has various streams where it's working with schools of sanctuary and other groups, as you may well be already aware. And this new venture is the local authority network, where you've got a group of willing local councils across the UK who reject the concept of a hostile environment and want to promote the principles of sanctuary in the services that they provide for the residents wherever they come from. And we set this up last year, and I want to thank the two officers from City Sanctuary movement, particularly Sian and Maggie, who have been helping to coordinate the network, the local authority network, and also today's event. And so there is a quick background for those of you who are new to all this. There is a formal process that if you want to actually become accredited as a local authority, have the local authority award for sanctuary from the City of Sanctuary Network, then please do get in touch with Maggie and Sian, because that's something that you can use to help show your local community what your council is doing as a local authority, be it a city, borough, or sanctuary locally. Either way, please do stay in touch and please contribute outside of this meeting. This is our first theme meeting, and we decided as a steering group that actually we wanted across this year to have 3 or 4 group events where we could learn from each other's experiences and come up with any common positions that we want to campaign on. And we thought there's no better, or should I say worse example in my view, than the no recourse to public funds system, which is, I think, the biggest example of the current government, I mean government with a small g, approach to the hostile environment. So it's a system we have to operate in, but we can try and apply the principles of sanctuary to make sure that we can do the best that we can for the residents we serve. So we'd like to hear views. We're going to hear views from various people involved in the system today. And we've also got a position statement, draft position statement, which we will welcome everyone's views on that before we take that forward. Without further ado, I'm just going to quickly check that I've got the agenda in front of me. So to set the context, I'm pleased to welcome Henry St. Clair Miller to take this forward. Before I do, can I just a couple of bits of housekeeping. Given there are so many of us today, then obviously I'll be following the chat to see if people want to contribute for questions and things like that. I'll also look for hands. We'll play it by ear, as I think we all know from remote virtual meetings. And also to say that this meeting is being recorded. So if you can or you don't wish to, if you're unable to, you don't wish to be recorded, then obviously either switch your camera off or just use the chat, whichever you think is more appropriate. So thank you for joining, and I will now pass on to Henry.
Brilliant, thank you, Kevin, and hopefully you are seeing the slides. So I'm just going to provide a brief update on the legal context and some good practice principles in relation to working with people who have no recourse to public funds. I believe these slides will probably go out to you because there'll be some detail on the slides that I won't have time to fully cover. So always think it's quite useful just pointing out at the beginning what public funds are. So they are welfare benefits and housing, as shown on the slide. Now, what we know from working in this area is that there are plenty of other taxpayer funded services that are not in fact public funds. And that can indeed lead to some misconceptions and some confusion. And it's certainly something that in our local area we need to think quite carefully about. So, for example, social services support is not a public fund, nor is NHS healthcare. But equally, as the line at the bottom of the slide says, well, sometimes there are additional restrictions that may cause limitations in accessing those. So it is complex. Now, we know from our practice that there is a significant impact on social services departments, and that's because if you have a situation where welfare benefits and housing are ruled out for people who are destitute, then equally there's going to be a responsibility to ensure that children and vulnerable adults are also kept safe from harm and indeed kept off the streets. And so social services support have an important role to play in terms of providing a safety net. This is a statutory safety net as outlined under the Care Act, under the Children's Act for families and for care leavers. What we also know about this safety net is that although a destitute child will be a child in need and so therefore will warrant the provision of Section 17 financial support to the child and their parent or guardian, the safety net is not quite so wide for adults because they must have care and support needs. So again, this statutory safety net is really quite limited. Drawing everyone in and the COVID-19 pandemic, it is now been helpfully confirmed by the High Court which powers local authorities can in fact use to accommodate people with no recourse to public funds. And I've put that on this slide. So this is during the emergency. For as long as that emergency continues, there should not be people with no recourse to public funds on the streets destitute, but of course local authorities will be looking at other statutory support that might be available for people, such as support provided by the Home Office to asylum seekers. But this is a helpful thing to remember during the pandemic. It is good that you are hosting a meeting on this particular issue because there are many people with no recourse to public funds who have many different forms of immigration status. And this slide just put up some of the facts that we know or estimates of numbers of people who have this condition applied. So 1.4 million people may have leave that is subject to the NRPF condition in the United Kingdom. 800,000 to 1.2 million may be unauthorized migrants living in the United Kingdom without status. We know that over 2 million grants of pre-settled status under the EU settlement scheme have been granted, but with no automatic entitlement to benefits. And the government is quite keen on creating new NRPF groups. So you will see that under the new immigration system for EA nationals from the 1st of January 2021, and of course for British national overseas visitors from the 31st of January 2021 as well. So it is something to prepare for, something to put into your thinking as a local authority when you are supporting communities. We know from the data provided to us by local authorities that use the NRPF Connect database to help manage their family and adult caseloads that the cost of providing assistance by way of accommodation and subsistence is very high. The time it takes to resolve a case is considerably lengthy. And we also know that when people leave support, they most likely will do so because they've been granted leave to remain with recourse. So these are some stats about cost and about how long does it take to achieve a resolution. So in terms of today's event, really, I'm thinking about, well, how do you set that strategic intent of a council to do more in this area? So these are some of my thoughts on this. So one, you need to really engage with the council's leadership and politicians. It is great when there is a link between the operational staff and the leadership. And the question really is, how can working with no recourse to public funds residents further key priorities that might relate to ending homelessness or protecting public health or building thriving communities? Because if you see the issue from that angle, then it is easier to put services in place to assist. Engage with those that you are supporting. Do they understand what to expect of services being provided by the local authority? Are they aware of those limitations where those limitations exist? And what have we done to canvass their ideas on improving the service that we provide to them? And in Islington, I'm very proud of our NRPF team, but we did a bit of a questionnaire about our subsistence rates. And I must say, I realized immediately after reading all of that our subsistence rates were not fit for purpose, and we had to considerably raise them based on that feedback from service users. Next thing, you've got to always have that eye on sustainable outcomes. So if someone is at risk of homelessness or is destitute at this point in time because of an immigration-based exclusion, what are we going to do to find a sustainable route out of dependency? And the final one is just remember that the NRPF network has a great deal of resources on this area of practice, and many of you on the call are already familiar with that and already use those resources. So please continue to do that to inform your service delivery, to set the standard in your work, and also to contribute collectively to evidencing pressures on local government as a result of immigration-based exclusions. The more we work together through these kinds of networks, the more that you use, for example, NRPF Connect to evidence the work that you are doing, the more powerful it is when submitting evidence, for example, to parliamentary inquiries and other consultations. Those sustainable outcomes are change of immigration status. They are self-sufficiency through employment for some groups of people, and of course, return to country of origin, which is never a taboo subject. It is something that might be appropriate for some people, but it is normally not the first option on the list of what people would like to do. So you don't use that all the time. You might use that in some circumstances. Now, these slides, I haven't got much time. They never work each time I try and present them. But ultimately, I'll just go to this one. Oh, this one has worked. This is reason for closure for family cases. It's just incredible. 82% of all the families supported by social services using the NRPF Connect database are leaving support because they've been granted status. Which really puts an emphasis on working in partnership with, for example, advice providers to really try and ensure that barriers to resolution are being broken down by those experts. So think about what it is once I've provided support that leads to a resolution, that leads to one of those sustainable outcomes that I mentioned. In terms of your practice, investor saving is important here. Invest in specialist workers and teams that know about this area of work, that can coordinate services, that can monitor progress towards agreed goals. Think about protocols to help identify cases and guide assessment processes, and to explain to customers what it is that they might expect when interacting with your local authority. Always keep that focus on proactive resolution, know your caseloads, and indeed review the cases that you are supporting to ensure an outcome is achieved. These are some example resources from the NRPF network. My time is pretty much up. So the Supporting Migrant Families web tool, tailored information to help you when working with families, fact sheets on providing support to EA nationals and during the pandemic, all up to date. And our website with additional resources is on this slide, along with our contact email address for further inquiries. Okay, so thank you for your time. I'll just stop the screen share. I think that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. That was really nice and succinct and very, very clear. And can I sort of give my own thanks to you and the NRPF network and the work you're doing in Islington and elsewhere on this, because you've been a great example and to us across the UK, plus also you know, giving us some of the resources that we need when we're reviewing how we do things in our local authority. So thank you very much. I hope you can stick around for, we've got a panel session coming up, but also a general Q&A later on. But if anybody's can't stick around for that, obviously you've sent your contact details there and we can forward them on to you afterwards. But thank you so much, Henry.
Yeah.
We're now going to move on. We've got a panel session now. So this is going to be chaired by, I'm going to hand over to Lucy Smith, who's the Policy and Campaigns Director at NACOM, to sort of introduce herself and the members of the panel to go through some of the issues that people are grappling with. So I'll hand over to Lucy if you are, there you are, I can see you. So over to you.
Hi everybody, hope you can hear me. Thank you, Kevin, and thanks Henry. So yeah, as Kevin said, I'm Lucy. I work for NACOM, which is the No Accommodation Network, and I'm the Policy and Campaigns Coordinator. And today I'm really delighted to be facilitating a conversation with panellists from different parts of the UK, sharing examples of good practice and collaborative work with local authorities, taking an inclusive approach towards people with no recourse to public funds. Just briefly, NACOM, we're a network of around 130 member organisations and individuals from across the UK. And our full member organisations, some of whom I've seen on the chat, so I know they're on the call, our full members provide accommodation for people with no recourse to public funds and people with refugee status. And many of those work in some way or other with their local authorities. So that's really good to see. It's really exciting to see the development of this local authority network, and it's never felt more timely. Just before I introduce the panellists and we get into the conversation, we should remember that at the centre of this conversation are the experiences of people who are living in their local communities but are facing exclusion and poverty because of this cruel and inhumane government policy. Through working with local organisations and people with lived experience, NACOM and our members help people with no recourse to public funds get shelter, support and justice, and push for lasting policy change. A year on from everyone in England and equivalent directives in the devolved nations, it's important to reflect on and learn from what's been achieved and the steps taken towards a more inclusive approach, so that whenever we're talking about building back better, whether with council or voluntary sector colleagues, with parliamentarians or at an individual level, we're all working towards an approach that leaves no one behind. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panellist. This is Forward, Mr. Quadzo. He's the advisor for inclusion to the Mayor of Bristol, and he's going to be speaking for a few minutes now. Over to you, Forward.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, everybody, and for joining today. I'm just going to really whiz through what we have done in Bristol to share and inspire ourselves and also learn from other local authorities as well. I'm just going to share my very brief slide. All right, is that everybody can see?
Yep, we can see.
Brilliant. Yeah, as I said, my name is Ford Maisokwadzo. I'm an inclusion advisor, the Mayor of Bristol, and I'm also proud to be the son and soil of City of Sanctuary. So that this is where we come from as Bristol, because I think we are so proud and excited that what we do and what drives us is that we are a city of sanctuary, and we are a city that tries to promote welcome, safety, and hope for everyone. Very brief background. Pre-COVID, our ambition as a city was to ensure that we address our homeless and rough sleeping strategy, as well as implementing our refugee and asylum seeker strategy, whose main purpose is actually to live up to our designation as a city of sanctuary, and also provide a platform for increasing strategic coherence across the corporate body on refugee issues. I say so because this is really important and within the context of what we are discussing today. Yeah, just like any other local authority, we were also, part of the Everyone In. We had about 400 people in the hotel. Of those ones, about 80 were people subject to NRPF. So what we did from the very onset, we sort of have our own internal Everyone In, led by our housing options, supported by the Mayor's office and the voluntary sector. I have two key groups, one looking for EA nationals, what we call the Move On project. Then the other one was asylum seekers Move On. Most of the details I'm sure Margaret already emailed around some of the lessons that we have learned through this process. So don't worry much about taking notes because Margaret already circulated. Those who did not get the paper will get it after the meeting. So what was important about this is it wasn't necessarily about groups just coming together. It was more of case work type of approach, which is very unique, that people were looking at individual cases and look collectively, so how do we work, how do we support people? So the social services, our adult team would also move in to provide with the, all the necessary, assessment. Those who go through the, human rights assessment will also look into the voluntary sector. When I talk about the voluntary sector, it's about, those who work with refugees, meeting with the council, look at individual cases. Where do those individual, insofar as their immigration status is concerned, where are they, how are they supported? And it was, at a time where it was difficult to, when drop-in centers have been closed. So it's been very helpful in terms of reaching out to people directly, which was going to be very difficult if the local authority have done on their own. So we're having at the very beginning bi-weekly meetings to look at the individual cases and status in preparation of how do we make people move on. So we also had our internal welfare rights and advice support to provide those ones to go for training, offer the, through learning, encouraging people to be signposted for other, agencies, and also encouraging people to apply for pre-settled status, etc., and continuing providing temporary accommodation through our housing options. But it wasn't easy. How do we, because of the limited accommodation, we also had joined up with our internal, particularly for asylum seekers. We teamed up with our internal comms through our We Are Bristol campaign, in jointly with the Bristol Hospitality Network, which is part of NACOM. They provide support people who are destitute, to try to reach out to cohorts. So most of the people that normally provide with accommodation were sort of the elderly who were not sort of taking, but the overwhelming response that we received through that appeal also helped to get people on board. The reason why we also did that appeal was also a way to raise awareness about NRPF to the community, and ensure that people knows the gravity of the issues locally, and the mayor, being very outspoken about it, both locally and national. So that was quite a good response there. And there's what we call a homeless move on service, where it looked from the social services, from the refugee sector, as well as from the other agencies supporting people. as we all know, some would be, getting their, moved from hotels to provided with, accommodation. Some is still waiting. Currently, we have about 60 people. And the latest, developments, we were hoping that one of our night shelters would agree. We've been working to hoping that the lockdown would be eased, but the public health said they are not able. Night shelters still cannot accommodate people. But I think what is good out of that is they have agreed the funding that they had. They have agreed for it to be used to continue specifically support 9 NRPF people that are currently in accommodation. So it's really just sort of evidence of the commitment within the sector, which had not there be sort of a joined up, sitting at the table, sharing, experiencing and learning from also other places. This could not have happened. And I think I just wanted also to pick on what Lucy also said. Really, I think it might be a case for Bristol. I think we've been very open. We just have to also be very open. Some of the things that we experienced, to lobby about it and to be open about it, and they might reach an extent of writing to the Prime Minister. Of course, we can all anticipate what the response was, including the Home Secretary. But we did this as where we stand as a city, to highlight the gravity and the challenges that we also face. Internally, we also work with our asylum team, which is sort of like the same NRPF team in Islington, to beef up the skills, to ensure that people have the the expertise and the resources to meet the scale of the challenge. It's not easy, but these are some of the things that we have done, and what through also being supported by the voluntary sector to come and deliver training to the staff as well. I think what drives us is what I would sort of sum up with what our mayor says. We are committed to be a city of welcome, safety and hope for all, where everyone shares in its success. And we cannot share in its success whilst we have people that are subject to no recourse to public funds. That's why we continue to lobby, and excited that this local authority network can also help us to come together and share some good practice and ensure that we support people to the best of our ability. I just was very, very quick of what we have done, because I'm sure people have lots of questions. It will be much more better when we discuss questions, plus already the paper has been circulated. Thank you.
Thank you, Forward. Fantastic. And yeah, really, really great to see. And hopefully people have seen the paper, but as you say, it will be shared afterwards as well. And great to hear mention of Bristol Hospitality Network, who, as you say, have played a crucial role in this work directly on the ground. And just to pass now to Ruth Brown, who's the Legal Director at Asylum Justice in Wales. Ruth, I can't see you, so I'll just mute myself and let you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me, because I think it's definitely, in terms of what's happened the last couple of weeks with the government, essentially declaring war on asylum seekers, really, and, threatening to bring in measures which, if successful, will really see the right to claim asylum taken away from people. And essentially Britain completely failing to honour its obligations under the UN Convention on Refugees. So even though it remains to be seen how far Priti Patel will go, and how much of this is just sort of dog whistle politics, in the run up to elections, to, sort of encourage their sort of political base, that remains to be seen. But I think, anybody who works with refugees and migrants, can see from the planned legislation that, she is planning and has announced a very, very serious attack on asylum seekers and refugees. And this talk of a second sort of a second-class citizen system, really, where if you travel through a so-called safe third country on your way to the UK, you'll now no longer be allowed to enter the asylum system in UK. I'm sure that one of the main reasons for doing that is because their intention will be to stop those people also being able to claim NAS. Personally, I think those are things that the government won't be able to get away with, that immigration judges, high court judges will not really be willing to sustain and maintain some of the implications, some of the things that this new legislation will mean. But I think the more that people are campaigning and publicising what the changes are right from the outset, the better. And I think that's why this is such an important time for people to come together to really share our sort of expertise and knowledge to really prepare for what could be the fight of our lives, really, in terms of those of us who've sort of been working in the asylum system for a long time. Asylum Justice, the organisation I work for, we're actually a charity that provides free legal advice and representation to asylum seekers who fail to qualify for legal aid. And I'm sure people are familiar with with the legal aid cuts that have taken place over particularly the last 6 or 7 years, where not only have certain types of refugee-related work been taken out of scope, so-called. So, for instance, you can't get legal aid for doing family reunion applications for recognised refugees. You can't get legal aid to make an application based on your family or private life, which is obviously something that a lot of people who perhaps fail in the asylum system but aren't able to be removed, and obviously they build up and establish private and family life, and then there's another route open to them, but that's a route that people have to pay to pursue, and with the application fees for those sort of applications running over £1,000 for each applicant, each family member, obviously the massive fees that have been imposed and increased during the last 5 years has really put those options sometimes out of reach of unsuccessful asylum seekers who now have a new basis on which to claim the right to remain. So we do the fee waiver applications that can be submitted in certain types of leave applications where people can't afford the fee. Again, solicitors can't really do those because you can't claim legal aid to do them. They're incredibly time consuming. But I think all of these doors that the government has tried to close to asylum seekers and failed asylum seekers, certainly at Asylum Justice, we see our role as trying very much to keep those doors open by providing services for really every people in every part of the system. We do a lot of asylum appeals because of the way in which the so-called merits test is applied, where you have to have a 40-50% chance of succeeding at appeal for you to be able to get legal aid. And obviously that's a point at which many people are dropped by the solicitor and no longer able to get legal aid. And I think what started, say, 15 years ago, long before I was ever involved with Asylum Justice, of really providing a sort of very friendly advice, one-off advice giving session to people who mainly had solicitors. I think the cuts and the pushing out of experienced immigration solicitors from the sector, really, because of the level of cuts, means people just can't really do a decent job for clients under the current restrictions on legal aid. I think becoming an organisation that really, I think, we're probably now one of the main providers of legal advice and representation to asylum seekers in Wales. It tells you something, I think, about how legal aid and the legal aid solicitors are both continuing to shrink. So I think we see ourselves as an organisation that tries to tackle destitution at source, because obviously all the services that many people here provide, and the liaison with the local authorities to make sure they're providing what they should be providing, as well as fighting and challenging NAS. Really, for a lot of people, the only way that they can end destitution and end the ban and restriction on being able to access public funds is by getting leave to remain. And the route to doing that is, as people are probably aware, most of the time, a fresh asylum claim, something that solicitors are less and less able to do. But even that, I think this government is so cynical that often they will refuse the fresh asylum claim before the person's NAS Section 4 application is even, has even been decided. So even that as a route is something that they very deliberately moved to close off. And it really does sometimes feel like a, playing cat and mouse game, really, with the Home Office. But obviously, having your life, being in that situation as somebody who's been forced to live destitute in the UK for years is so incredibly disheartening. And it certainly seems that that situation is going to increase, really, because despite what Priti Patel says, so many of the people who were refused asylum, often who never had decent representation in the initial stage, who did have a good case, but where, the proper evidence and representations weren't put forward, those people aren't able to be returned. If you just look at the top 2 or 3 refugee producing countries like Iran or Iraq, there is no way of removing people, and yet they're forced, as I'm sure everyone is aware, to live destitute on the street, sofa serving for absolutely year after year after year. It's an absolutely inhumane system already, but the idea that it's now going to be made even worse by introducing this 2-tier asylum system is something that I think we really, really have to fight so hard against. And, all of us need to mobilise within the third sector, within the voluntary sector, to basically join up, share expertise, and do what we can to challenge the completely unlawful nature of so many decisions that are made by the government and by NAS, but which the lack of legal aid and legal aid solicitors means those challenges just aren't brought, when if they could be brought, so many of these decisions wouldn't really stand up in court. So I think, we all realise that, just to finish, that we're really going to be, we really need to unite and fight on behalf of our client group. Just last week, just to finish, Dayton Pierce Glynn managed to get overturned in the High Court the Tories rule that if they do lift the no recourse to public funds restriction on somebody, they are then having to move from the 5-year route to the 10-year route. Incredibly spiteful and mean decisions, but which happily Dayton Pierce Glynn have managed to get declared unlawful. So even though it sometimes feels like there's an onslaught against our clients and sometimes against us, I think there's always a silver lining. And where you get really good immigration solicitors, public law solicitors like Dayton Pierce Glynn, it just shows how strategically sort of directed litigation can really win big gains for our client group in the courts by declaring various policies of this government unlawful. So just to finish, we don't know everything that is going to be in this bill, everything that will be imposed, but I certainly hope that forums like this will be able to be the bedrock of defending what our clients already have and ensuring that more isn't taken off them as the government attempts to further deepen the hostile environment that was first introduced under Theresa May. So I'll just leave it there, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much. And yeah, just to kind of echo that, this is a really important time to be coming together and working together on these crucial issues. Without further ado, because I know there's lots of questions I'm sure buzzing around, and we'll come back to hearing more from each of you. I'd like to hand over now to Anya Kajek from COSLA. Anya, you there?
Hello everyone. Hi, I hope you can hear me well. My name is Anya Tajczak. I'm working at COSLA Migration, Population and Diversity team. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting us today. As the previous speaker said, it's a really important time to speak about NRPF issues. I think we all do see and recognize the impact that NRPF has on people in our communities, and I'm really glad to see that there's more and more forums focusing on the impact on NRPF on people. So for the few minutes, I wanted just to talk you through some of the work that we've been doing in Scotland around NRPF, especially over the past year, just to kind of flag up some of the developments. So in the pre-COVID world, our work at COSLA primarily focused on working with local authorities in strengthening the way they can use their statutory powers to support people with NRPF within their communities. So how local authorities could support families with children and vulnerable adults within their local authority areas. So a couple of years ago, we've produced a guidance for local authorities together with NRPF network that Henry is heading, and with our local Scottish charity called Just Right Scotland, just to outline the complex kind of legal background and encourage local authorities to use their powers, to apply their powers, and also for local authority officers and frontline staff to get a better understanding of what NRPF is, what NRPF condition means for people, and what public funds can still be used to support people within our communities. Over the past year, the COVID has definitely changed the landscape and the way we work. So first of all, in the response to COVID, we kind of look at rapid response and how we can make sure that people are supported and accommodated. And from COSLA's side, we've produced a framework that outlined the legislative powers for local authorities, how the public health emergency can be used to accommodate people regardless of the immigration status. So hopefully this framework, which outlines kind of the main considerations together with some of the additional funding that we've seen in Scotland for accommodation and support, there was quite a lot of movement to get people off the streets to make sure that people are accommodated, which I think is very, very positive. So regardless of the NRPF condition, whether they're EA nationals or whether they were without status, they were able to get accommodated and supported. We also conveyed NRPF Consortium. So that was a group of kind of COSLA-led group of organizations with interest with NRPF, with a lot of third sector organizations and with Scottish Government, which looked at response to COVID. And that was also kind of the first step to formalize kind of the relationships and also look at a more kind of formal division of the roles of statutory services and non-statutory services in supporting people with NRPF. And I think importantly, we've recognized that that needs to be, all of the kind of response need to be delivered in a partnership, that it's it's a kind of shared responsibility, and that there would be different people in different circumstances needing different response, and that we need third sector and statutory bodies to work together to make sure that people are supported. So that was kind of our initial work at the beginning of the COVID. Then later down the line, we kind of learned a lot from it. We've learned a lot how kind of using powers more creatively and how some additional powers and resources deployed differently allow us to achieve a lot. And kind of learning from COVID also fed into anti-destitution strategy that we've been working on jointly with Scottish Government. So just last week, we've published the strategy, which is called Ending Destitution Together, and it looks at our kind of Scottish collective response to destitution amongst people with NRPF, with the aim to get people to safety and support regardless of their immigration status. So under the strategy from our kind of COSLA side, we're going to look at how we can further strengthen the way local authorities can use their powers to support people who have the statutory kind of who would be eligible for the statutory services. So similar, as I said, families with children and vulnerable adults. And we also look at how we can work in partnership with different organizations to make sure that people who do not have those statutory entitlements would be supported. And I think quite an exciting piece of work that it's been going on in Scotland over the past few months as well is the response of Everyone Home Collective, which is the third sector led response to provide accommodation to people who do not have statutory entitlement. COSLA has endorsed the route map that they've presented, and we're working together to kind of design comprehensive model to provide accommodation and support to people who do not have statutory entitlements. And also from our side, we look at how the services would speak to each other and how both the statutory services and the third sector can work to make sure that the network is comprehensive and the people are supported across the country. And I think that was kind of in the summary, a few points of our work that we have done recently, and we're really excited to see the direction of work. We are really happy to have this kind of overarching strategic approach in Scotland that we can all work towards. That it's a clear message that we're sending, to people within our communities, to our communities as well, that people who are in Scotland should be treated with their human rights, regardless of the immigration status, and that's the priority for us. So I think there's quite an exciting times ahead for us as well. When we move towards the implementation of the strategy, and then when we also look at the route map of the collective is developing. So I'm sure there would be more questions that I'm happy to answer. My colleague from the team, Eloise Nutt-Brown, is here as well, so we can take the questions. And I apologize, I haven't sent in advance all of the papers, but I'll put relevant links in the chat, and I'll also share them later with Maggie, so hopefully she can send them around to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya. And yeah, I think there's been a couple of links there in the chat already, but yeah, I had a look at the strategy last week, and yeah, it's fantastic. Really, really important piece of work. So thank you for sharing that. I think we're passing back to Kevin now. Is that right?
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all of you for that. And I think that was really helpful. Give a really from different broad perspectives across the UK on the current challenges at NRPF. So I hope that was useful to people who've been watching. We've obviously, if everyone's sticking around, after this next item, we're going to have a sort of general question and answer. And so people who are on the panel, if they can still join us for that, then we'll do that then. But now I just want to move into sort of the action that we can take. So hopefully everybody's, if you've got access to your registration email from Maggie, which has got a number of resources there, and in fact Maggie's going to share this one on screen. The steering group, when we decided to hold NRPF as our first theme, came up with a draft position statement, and the idea behind it is to summarize the context that local authorities are facing in trying to provide services under NRPF, firstly under the current pandemic, and secondly the system as a whole. So there are some calls for change, and it also acknowledges, of course, that the landscape does vary across the UK and with a devolved administration, so that's in there as well. But the idea is that if we can agree a position statement that has some calls for change, both in the short term, as I can see Maggie's doing at the moment, in relation to the response to the pandemic in particular. Oh, Maggie, if you can stop there, I can summarize that. If you scroll up again, just so we can cover this bit. So in particular, the everyone in policy, and of course we've had some court cases on that recently, and the suspension of NRPF conditions, so that we can sort of provide support and under the current emergency, but then there's evictions, but also free school meals. I know that in Lewisham, we're thinking about how we can continue that provision, because that is our council position anyway, for free school meals. But what happens as we come out of the pandemic? And then Maggie, if you scroll on to the next page, if you can, please. Of course, we're setting out the reasons, and these should all be familiar to all of us who are working with people affected by NRPF. And then this is, I think, sort of the broader point that I think we want to keep on campaigning on. And we've got to sort of add our local authority voices to this. And that is the system of NRPF. It sets out what we want with that, and we want a thorough review to have a fair system that can properly support those whose immigration status isn't clear. Obviously, we saw that slide earlier from Henry about 82% do get granted eventually. So, and in the meantime, that's not fair on people affected by that, and it's not fair on local authorities who are under huge pressure and don't get government resources to cover that. And to have this uncertain situation both for people suffering from NRPF, but also with local authorities who have to firstly make the decisions, and that's not easy, and that gets challenged all the time, but also provide that emergency support where they need to. So particularly, as we all know, local authorities throughout the UK have been facing massive cuts now for over a decade, and more to come. It's incumbent on us to sort of push back on this. So I hope everyone's had a chance to look at that position statement. I think the idea today really is to have comments on bits that we might want to improve in it, or if there are bits that aren't clear enough that we can put in that. Obviously, we can't sort of amend word by word, but as a giant committee. But so the plan is really we'll just take on board as a steering group, take on board any significant sort of points that need to be covered or changed. Obviously, we don't want to be a long rambling statement either. It's going to be succinct, but we'll do that as part of the Q&A. So I think the Q&A can be, I'll come to how that will work, but as part of that, we will take on board comments on the position paper. Then what we'll do is we will recirculate a revised position paper to everybody who's signed up to this call, and to share as widely as we can on the website and elsewhere. And then after a sensible period of time, then we will send it as a network, as a City of Sanctuary network, to the government. And of course, every local authority is free to adapt it for their own campaign purposes, with their own local sanctuary groups, but also to lobby the government. That's something we've been doing in Lewisham with this new network. We've put in our own voice. We've worked with our neighbouring authorities across London, and we've signed up to any City of Sanctuary calls to action. So it's a both and. We can all put the pressure on together. So this is a good example, I think, of where we can start working together with a stronger voice. And we have authority, not just for local authority. We actually do have authority and experience on the ground in trying to operate with the current NRPF system. So that's the position paper. So you've had the panel a bit before me, and Henry as well. So it'd be some useful information on the chat, and I hope people have been following that. Lots of useful links there, as well as the resources that Maggie sent out. So for the next sort of few minutes, we'll see how much reaction there is, but just want to sort of open it up to the virtual floor to see if anyone got any comments either on a position paper, or any questions they've got, or comments you'd like to make on what you've heard. What I would ask is when you do speak to, even though I think we've all done introductions by chat, just as a reminder of who you are and who you're representing, that would be helpful to all of us. The other thing is about how to sort of indicate. So what I'm going to try and do, I can see that on reactions, I think if you can, that now gives an option, I hope, to raise your hands. I will try and follow that, but if I do miss you, and please put something in the chat, and I will try and come back to you. So apologies if I miss you. It's not deliberate on my part. It's just me trying to make sure I've got everyone. And then what I will do is, if there are some questions at appropriate points, I will ask Henry and those on the panel to to respond. And also we've also got Maggie and Sean on any sort of city of sanctuary points that come up as well. They can chip in on. So at that point, are there any comments or questions on anything we've heard today, or anything else on NRPF that people would like to contribute? So if you raise your hand first in the first instance, and if that's not working, then please pop something in the chat.
I can see Jane.
Okay, so Jane,
it may not be pertinent, and I apologise, and I shall keep stum afterwards. My main concern is, and it was mentioned a few months ago, that the government might feel inclined to appoint their own judges to judge immigration cases and appeals, etc. And that is what's bothering me.
Thank you. Sorry, Jane, do you want to carry on?
I think that's
okay. Okay, I saw that comment in the chat, Jane. And Jane, just remind us who you're representing today, or?
Oh, sorry. I can't say I'm really representing. I'm a member of I'm a volunteer with the Southampton and Winchester Visitors Group, and we support and befriend asylum seekers and refugees.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jane. I'll see if anybody from who's presented today wants to say something. My own take, and this is only my own take, and I suppose maybe I'm a bit biased, so I'm a lawyer and wearing my other hat, is that you would hope, and I say this, that the government should not be anywhere near appointing members of the judiciary. The judiciary, appoint themselves. We don't elect judges, nor do we have government appointments, or nor should we have. So, but of course, there's always questions about how impartial that process is. So that's my take on that. Does anybody on the panel want to add that, or if anybody else when we do more questions and comments wants to come in on that? So, is anybody on the panel on that one? I'm just looking at hands being raised. No, that's my take on that. I've then got, in the order I've seen it in, I've got Councillor Helen Dennis, who I should say is my counterpart in our neighbouring borough, the London Borough of Southwark. So Helen.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi everyone, and thanks to everyone who contributed. It was really useful. We're fairly new to this forum. In fact, I don't know actually we've formally signed up, Kevin, so I will get on the case and ensure that we're formally part of the network. We've committed to become a borough sanctuary, but we're in the process of working with our local group to establish a forum and develop an action plan. So that's where we're currently at in the process. Just a couple of things. Just drawing on the presentations. I'm just always interested, again, someone fairly new into role, but in terms of partnerships with advice centres, law centres, etc. If anyone has got interesting kind of work in that area, partnerships to share, I'd be really interested to see that. We developed some work specifically working with single homeless people with no recourse to public funds during the pandemic, working with Southwark Law Centre. That's been really successful, and actually we've managed to secure some funding from MHCLG to extend that work, which is really positive because as people kind of pointed out in terms of the trends, the vast majority of cases are being resolved, and it's long-term cases for the most part as well. So really good to see people actually getting their status sorted out, but often historical benefits they should have had access to years ago, really. The one other thing I was just going to flag up, Kevin, in relation to the position statement, and I'll have a kind of further look at that in detail as well, but I think it's really helpful to have that down, and nothing that I would disagree with. I think it's really useful for us to have a collective voice on these issues. The one other thing that I would flag, I'm sure it's similar for lots of local authorities, that through the pandemic response and all of the work through the food hubs, food banks, we've seen significant percentage of people who are food insecure through the pandemic, as people with no recourse to public funds. So we're really trying to kind of understand the extent of the population locally with kind of food insecurity. I don't know how that quite turns into a action point or a kind of lobby point. But I suppose it's just another thing to flag up, because obviously you had the point about free school meals, which is really important around eligibility. But we've been seeing a lot of single people as well coming to our food banks, and the pandemic, I think, has just given greater visibility to obviously insecurity, which we knew was already there, but has obviously tipped a lot of people from a situation of insecurity into destitution as well. And I don't know whether there's anything more. I mean, obviously this is also up to some local authorities will be funding food banks directly. No one wants to be doing that at all, because they shouldn't exist, but they do. But long term, we're trying to kind of think now about how we move from emergency response and funding of food banks to a kind of longer term food insecurity model. And I think understanding what the local authority role is in terms of supporting those with no recourse to public funds in that area would be really helpful. Thanks.
And yeah, thank you, Helen. And yeah, that's, I think we can certainly reflect that and put a bit more sort of detail as to what it is that we're experiencing as councils and what we're seeing in our local areas on that. And I know that in Lewisham it's food, but it's also essential items, clothing, particularly kids and people having to try and do their work from home and getting vital computer equipment, and also the challenges that they face when they're it's not just they can't do the click and collect and things like that. Some can't, and so we've got an area in Lewisham that's a charity project which is working on that, and we're trying to support. So that's a very good example. We will put that in. Thank you, Helen.
Kevin, just to jump in, sorry, we've got a question from Ellen from Liverpool City Council. Ellen, would you like to ask your questions? It was directed at Helen. So.
Oh, to Helen. Okay, sure. And I see Chris as well. So Chris Harris. So we'll come to you as well. But if it's on that point, Ellen.
It was just a quick one about the MHCRG funding, and yeah, if you just.
It was via Protect and Protect Plus. So. Right. Through that funding stream, we specifically made a case for the work with the Law Centre on that.
Great, thank you. Chris, you've got your hand raised.
Hi. My name is Chris Harris. I'm the policy coordinator at Project 17. We're a charity that supports people to access Section 17 support. I'm quite new in role, and I'm very conscious that I'm a guest here. So I'm just going to make a couple of suggestions. And first, can I just say it's really nice to see you all here, and I'm very pleased to see so many people participating in a forum that focuses on NRPF. Before the pandemic, many people hardly knew about it, and it's really good to see people rallying around, because this is a significant problem for so many. I wanted to pick up on something Henry said, and just to feed that into a comment on the position statement. So I think Henry made a really nice turn of phrase, which was the invest to save. And I think that is something that's really important. And when you look at the position statements, one of the long-term, so extending free school meals, just as an example, obviously the government's extension over the pandemic has reached some families, but not all families. And I think, the children of families with irregular immigration status are still excluded from accessing, yet the need of the children is the same. So I think, putting the need of the community, the need of the children, and building thriving communities really, when you look at your long-term goals, it still says parents with NRPF conditions. And I think really the long-term goal here is to provide free school meals to all children whose parents qualify for the financial threshold, because I think, the mental and physical well-being of children so demonstrably declines when they don't have access to it. And we see that with food banks. And I think just for people who are here from local authorities, and for yourself as well, Kevin, the commitment at local authority level with councillors and leadership doesn't always trickle through to schools and understanding of actual free school meals. And I think, Southwark, Helen Dennis is here, they provide to all children, regardless of immigration status, free school meals. And I think that the message commitment from you that work in local authorities to really trickle that information and that attitude down through the ranks, as well as making kind of demands of government. And thank you very much. It's again very nice to see you all here.
Thank you, Chris. Some really good points. I mean, the first point I think, which would be good to reflect in some form or another, I like the general approach, which is to invest to save. And I can think of just one example in Lewisham. I know many authorities have been through this. So these embedded officers from the Home Office in the recent years, where the whole idea was the government offered, oh, well, we'll help you with your big pressures, huge pressures, you know, we'll help speed up the process, we'll give you somebody from the Home Office and to do all that. And both we and Thematic, for that matter, actually, I know lots of other authorities around the UK had this at the time to try and deal with these huge pressures that were on the NRPF service. But actually, you know, we were concerned about the deterrent that was causing for people. So we were coming to the council as well. You know, we didn't want to act like some, you know, the impression of some kind of border police at the council. And so what we did was we removed our Home Office official, and the money that we saved from that, we put that into local legal advice. So for people who needed that. So, and that's actually, guess what? That saved us. That saved us money. It's not just about speeding things up and making sure that people are getting proper advice. So that is an example. I like that theme of invest to save. The other point, you're absolutely right, Chris, is on free school meals. I know that you know, we're trying to get it through our schools forum in Lewisham, and just we act as a guarantee. We're expecting the schools to use their own budgets. They have their own pressures, and of course they do, and a lot of them have got deficits and all that. But we act the idea is that we act as a council as a guarantor. So we step in when the school has its own problems, but we need to make sure that there is a common policy across the whole local authority area. So, you know, I take that point. I've got Sian, and then I've got Maria. So, Sian.
I just wanted to reiterate the point about investing to save and Helen's question around, you know, working collaboratively with advice services. So Asylum Justice works with Cardiff Council, who have been providing some funding for legal advice generally around lifting NRPF conditions, but also routes to settlement, etc. But I think just to also mention, what the council did was support us in kind to actually complete a funding application to the Community Justice Fund. And, you know, given the pressures that Asylum Justice was under at the time in terms of, you know, lack of capacity, that, you know, that officer's time went a long way, and as you know, has supported countless individuals, you know, to now be able to get legal advice, and saved everybody time, money, and you know, and it has been a really successful outcome. So just, you know, flagging those examples of how to think innovatively to work with voluntary sector organisations.
Thank you, Sian. Maria.
Hi there. Okay, so for me, I just wanted to highlight something that I don't think anybody has brought up. I haven't spotted it if anybody has, and it's around rough sleepers and the intention that appears to be somewhere in, you know, out there, of actually removing them from the country, or attempting to remove them from the country. And that all feels like it, well, everything feels really urgent now, because there's so many things, so many hostile things that are happening. So that is one. Now, you know, it worries me, you know, around, well, June 2021 will be the cut-off date for the settlement programme for EUS, you know, for the EUSS, EU settlement scheme. We're going to eventually probably, you know, start being hit with the negative cessations for asylum seekers. And it feels like there's a race against time, because then they're also trying to bring in this rough sleepers being removed. And a lot of people that are picked up and perhaps assisted may be because they're rough sleeping, and it feels a little bit like it's going to be who's going to get to them first to help them, you know. Then, oh no, I mean, it's already been mentioned about the new proposals around the asylum seekers. And I'm quite new. I'm really well versed with the EU stuff, and I'm fairly new with the asylum seeker stuff. But my understanding is there's quite a lot of issues around data sharing as well, which seems to be taking forever to be resolved. So, you know, how do you step in before somebody is actually rough sleeping? You know, what, I know there's a lot of voluntary sectors going in, and that's brilliant, but it's, you know, it's just the difficulties that seem to be caused. And I feel like I'm being really negative, but I just don't think it's a very friendly atmosphere out there at the moment at all. And it just feels quite scary for people.
You're absolutely right. It's how what's it like on the ground dealing with that. And so you know, we had this change in immigration rules towards the end of last year, and many local authorities have publicly, certainly in London, where the GLA you know, said it was not going to collaborate, and sort of lots of local authorities sort of came up against these new rules. So we're not going to collaborate. We're not going to use the data that we receive, the information we get when our teams are going out looking for people sleeping rough, is to help them. It is for that purpose. That's the data, you know, the data rules, and that's how we're interpreting it. And we're not going to collaborate. And then we need to. The thing is, Marie, we've got to get that information, you know, get that message out. To people, you know, who are scared of coming forward or reluctant to deal with, you know, the authority, even when we're trying to help. So this is where we need to work with, certainly what we try and do in our area is try and work with people, you know, who, you know, local charities and volunteer groups who are working with migrants, refugees and asylum seekers, to get that message out to them and say, look, this information is not going to be used elsewhere. Same with safe surgeries that we're trying to promote for the vaccination program, saying, look, you know, we are encouraging our surgeries in our area not to, you know, not to be showing us data for other purposes. It's there for a particular purpose, not that other purpose. That's another issue. So that's something I think in a network, I know we've been sharing some of this information. We're trying to share examples that local authorities are doing, but other organizations are helping us, like in the case of safe surgeries, Doctors of the World. So I think we can, you know, we'll see how we can sort of reflect some of the practical issues like that in our statement. Sean, did you want to come in again?
Sorry, it's a legacy hand.
Oh, legacy hand. Okay, I've not been, sorry, I've just been following hands rather than chats, if there's anything else. I've got, I can see Philip, who's our sanctuary officer in Lewisham. So Phil, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was just a quick point. I really liked, as I think a few other people have said, the slide that Henry put up showing how many people within, you know, how many people go on to get further leave to remain, which I think was about 82%. I wonder whether we could perhaps reflect that in the position statement, because it shows how many people actually either are able to access, you know, with the right support, are able to access leave to remain. And I think if you include, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there was about 5% there that were family members of EU migrants, so they arguably already have access to benefits, and then another 5% went on to into the asylum system. So you're looking at sort of 9 out of 10 people either have a valid claim or are able to establish further leave to remain, provided that they get the right support. So it's not a case of, you know, people who are NRPF, it's a temporary situation. People can actually go into the mainstream benefit system if the right support is made available to them.
Okay. Yeah, that's. I think that. I mean, I was really taken by that statistic. So I think I'm certainly going to be using that myself. Also, okay. Oh, Henry, do you want to come back on that or anything else?
You're muted, Henry.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's just a reflection from the discussions, because, you know, it is quite helpful. It's quite helpful looking at the other documents that have been shared in the chat and yeah, that were circulated before. But I guess there's you know, it feels to me sometimes like there are sort of three distinct areas. So you have at the bottom, really at the foundation, you have a direct statutory response, and that's the bit that I've really spent my time in, which is really around where we should be accommodating, and that must work. And I like it how in the COSLA strategies it really talks, and you've got it as well in your statement, it really talks about saying, well, hang on a second, local government has this responsibility, even if it costs money, even if we didn't want it, we have it, and we've got to use that correctly. Then we have another tier, like a middle tier, which is all of the indirect work we do, where it's not so much about that statutory safety net. That's where we are into the whole thing, which baffles me sometimes, around access to things like school meals, resident support schemes, the COVID winter clothing grants, and also just advice and guidance, where there will be people looking to the council for interaction, for support, and for assistance, and for signposting, and to access services. They're not looking for a direct service provision in terms of that safety net, in terms of that statutory function. Then at the top of the triangle, you've almost got that strategic outlook, and that's where really for all residents, we are just trying to make sure that the culture of our organisation, or the values of our organisation, is benefiting everyone. And that it doesn't matter whether you are NRPF or not, it doesn't matter who you are, it's for everyone. Now if I take a thorny subject like data sharing, well, what I would be saying, well, it's not what I'd be saying, it's just a fact. If you're talking about direct statutory service provision, you're going to be needing to data share to some level, because it is just part of this area of work. And that's why we have operated NRPF Connect for 10 years. But then, of course, where you're looking at other interactions where that is not on the cards, then it is inappropriate to have that level of data sharing. That is where we are dealing with people where they're not asking for a direct statutory support. We're looking at advice, guidance, access to other services, and that is certainly where it needs to be completely ring-fenced from any interaction with the immigration authorities. And that includes that initial contact with people who are rough sleeping, where we need to be supportive. And that strategy bit is something that I think that I'll be looking at this statement. I'll be looking at the City of Sanctuary membership from an Islington Council point of view, because I think we've done some of that statutory work very well. We've not translated it into sort of well, we have the overall objective to create a fair society in Islington, so a fairer place, but we need to think about how that translates into actions that are relevant for refugees and migrants. So that's something we'll take away, but three quite distinct areas.
Thank you, Henry. Some very clear thoughts there, both from Islington's perspective, but also a very clear explanation about data sharing, for example, and what that means. And would definitely welcome your input and if anybody wants to sort of come back on the position statement once you've really digested on it, and get in touch with Maggie and Sean afterwards, and then we'll collate that and reflect that. So thank you for that, Henry. Are there any other comments, questions?
I'd like to.
Oh, sorry, Lucy. Yeah.
Hiya. Yeah, just really to echo that, I think that's a really helpful way of thinking and framing things in terms of recognizing both the value of the work that for instance COSLA talked about in the presentation around that approach of saying regardless of immigration status, there's kind of this recognition that everybody should have these basic human rights, and that I think is something that is really important that's embedded, because I think that's what we saw in the kind of we saw in the Everyone In directive, this time a year ago, that approach of kind of it's irrelevant, what the label is that's attached to you. Actually, there's a recognition that there's a public health emergency. What we would say is that destitution is always a public health emergency, and so there is a really important role for local authorities to play in absolutely embedding that culture and that strategic culture of how can we be doing the most possible to support the most people possible, recognising, of course, all the funding issues that there are. But really, you know, I think Forward, it was on your last slide, there was the quote from the mayor. I didn't write it down quick enough, but there was a line about everyone can succeed, and that just a recognition of this kind of inclusive approach, I think, is so crucial. But that's sort of, it's not an either or with that and the need for legal advice and the need for people to be able to access their rights, and the routes to that being as clear and frankly as well funded as possible, you know, because we know that it takes a long time. I'd be really interested, I don't know if Helen is still on the call, if she left, but really interesting to kind of talk more about the funding that came through last year from MHCLG to certain local authorities that's supporting legal advice, because you know, I think there's some really important learning that could go on there, and really useful evaluation of what does how long has that funding been in place for, you know, is there, what's the scope for kind of what work can be done in a short period of time, you know, for instance, over a 6-month period, but recognizing that actually for a great many people, things are so much more complex and they will need a lot longer, like the NRPF stats show, that kind of 2-year window, much more realistic, and therefore there's kind of, you know, it's not either or, there's a need for a humanitarian, a kind of everyone in long-term approach, regardless of the COVID pandemic, and as well as really an embedded access to rights, so that everybody can move on and succeed in their communities.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, I absolutely take that point. It's a both and. So I think the starting point is everyone in and inclusiveness. And actually, this pandemic's reminded people generally that, you know, we all depend, you know, on everyone, you know, being, getting the support they need. But at the same time, we have to recognise the challenges that certain people in our community are facing, whether it's the law, resources, whether there's, you know, and the sort of the approach I touched on earlier about people being reluctant to come forward, and so we have to overcome those challenges, and so that everyone really is treated equally and fairly on that. So absolutely, let's reflect that in what we do with this position paper and the way we approach this issue going forward. Then there's, I see the comment there from Forward, from Marvin Rees coming in there. Yeah, we are committed to being a city of welcome, safety and hope for all. Everyone shares in its success. Yeah, I like that. Okay, any other comments or questions? Because I'm conscious we're coming up to our sort of allotted time, so we're due to finish in a few minutes. Sian, yes, I'm going to raise this response to the immigration plan. So at this point, so what I'm going to do on the NRPF situation now is say, look, we will thank you for everybody's contribution on that today. This is a network that we can talk to each other, and please, for the moment, we can do that. How we talk to each other, we're thinking about that, the best way to do that, not just on this issue, but on sharing good practice issues going forward generally. So we will work on that. And I know, obviously, for NRPF, there's the NRPF network as well. There are tried and tested formulas. So thank you, Henry, for putting that forward today. So we will do that. So on the next step on this issue is that we will digest comments. So please, if you've got any comments, you can try and get them in, in short order early on this week. I'm also conscious that of where we are, both that many of us we're in this pre-election period at the moment. So what we can say as local authorities, obviously individually, those of us who are elected members are free to say what we like in our own ways, but we will think about that and how we best go public and when we go public. But for the moment, if you get your comments in, and then I think in short order we'll circulate a revised position statement. I see Dawn Murray said, can we get presentations? I'm sure we can send. I'm looking to. Yeah, I'm seeing thumbs up. Yeah, we can circulate that again. So we will do that. And then the other themes that are coming up. We've got. Many of us are obviously resettling refugees as local authorities directly, or supporting groups that are doing that. And of course, we all are having to respond to the challenges faced by people who don't have refugee status, asylum seekers. And we're hoping to do something around Refugee Week, and we will do in mid-June. But in the meantime, we were wondering when this is going to come up, but Priti Patel, in her wisdom, decided to get this out in the last week, which is the new plan for immigration. Very helpfully asked for consultation responses by the 6th of May. So that kind of is restricting what local authorities can say publicly about that. But I would really urge everybody to respond to that. We as a network, I think, can try and coordinate something as well in the way that we can. So we will be in touch separately about that. But if you've got comments that you think would help inform any common approach we can take on that new so-called new plan for immigration, then please let us do that. The consultation, I'm afraid, is just the start of this. This is going to be a long running issue, and we have to really unpick this going forward. So that there is that issue coming forward. We've also got, I think, as was flagged in one of the earlier presentations, we've got the issue of many of our residents who still need settled status under the Brexit fallout, and also we've got the issue of Hong Kong nationals, who have the right to come over here. So, and how we all adapt as local authorities to make sure that we're providing support to all those and with proper integration. So that's all I want to say at this stage. I'm now looking to Maggie and Sian in case there's anything from their perspective that I should have said, or anything else you'd like to add.
We likely leave the NRPF position statement till after the pre-election period. So, but please do obviously send your comments in as soon as possible, so we can get that finalised, and then move on to the consultation response to the new immigration plan. Just to say, we had been planning another thematic meeting in June, specifically, around the consultation on whatever new plans came out. Obviously, that timing doesn't work well for us, but as Kevin mentioned, we'll revisit sort of resettlement and generally the kind of response to the immigration plan in that meeting. But in the meantime, we'll work with you on a consultation response, so please do engage with that as well. Thank you very, very much for everyone who's attended today. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear from everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, and that really has. And let's say thank you for everybody who's joined today. It's been, we've all hopefully become better informed, and this is, hopefully this is the start for many of us for this to carry on having interactions like this, because it will make a difference, both in campaigning and what we do on the ground in our local community. So really thank you for joining today. I also want to thank Henry, Lucy, and and members of the panel as well for all your contributions today, and others who've put contributions in the question and answer session. And last but not least, I'd really like to thank Maggie and Sian, who have been putting this all together, doing the work behind the scenes, doing the steering group, all of that. This is a whole new project for us as part of City Sanctuary Movement. And we're already starting to make a difference. So I really want to thank them, and I look forward to seeing all of you, probably virtually, sometime soon. And let's stay in touch in the meantime. We've got our contact details for people who want to share them, and it's been a real pleasure today. So thank you for your time, and I hope everybody gets to enjoy wherever you are, hopefully some decent weather later today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.